Well, good day and welcome to lesson 19 in our study of the book of Mark. Today we're still in chapter 6 and we're going to do verses 14 through 29. This is a well-known story, but some of the details, however, are not really as well known as others. So let me read the first part of this to get it started. Now King Herod heard of him, for his name had become well known, and he said, "John the Baptist is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him." Others said it is Elijah, and others said it is a prophet, or like one of the prophets. But when Herod heard, he said, "This is John, whom I beheaded. He has been raised from the dead." For Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. Because John had said to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." This story is now relating back to a previous time when Herod had had John the Baptist beheaded. Now, when Herod had heard the rumors of Jesus and what Jesus had been doing, he said, "This must be John the Baptist coming back to life," because of all what John the Baptist had stood for before when he was alive. This is all part of the history around Herod. Now, the family of Herod was one mixed up bunch of people. So in order to understand this situation, how it sort of developed, it's necessary to go back and understand a little bit of the family of Herod. When Jesus was born, there was a king called Herod the Great. Now, he was not really a king any more than Herod and Herod Antipas that we're talking about now, in this time, was a king. They were tetrarchs. They were rulers under the authority of Rome. So they were not really kings, although the people around them called them kings, and Mark obviously calls Herod king as well. But when Jesus was born, Herod the Great was on the throne of this part of the world. Now, although he was great in some ways, he was not great in stature. He was a very small man, according to one commentator, less than 5 feet tall. But he was very paranoid. He was a very paranoid person. Although he made some great monuments, he built some great cities. He built Herodias, and he built Masada, and he built the temple in Jerusalem. He was very paranoid. He was a very paranoid person. So when he initially married this lady, and she bore him 2 children. But because of his paranoia, because he felt there was a conspiracy against him, he had her and these 2 children murdered. He then married another lady who also bore him some children, but at the same time, he had these people murdered as well. And he married another time and had children by her, his 3rd wife, one of whom was called Herod Philip. Herod Philip ended up marrying the daughter of one of Herod the Great's other sons who he had murdered. So he married his niece, in other words. And he became somewhat of a businessman. He worked in Egypt, apparently. Worked in Rome. Maybe as a merchant, as a businessman there with this wife, Herodias. Herod the Great, had another wife and other sons, one of whom became Philip Antipas, who was now the ruler of part of Philip's lands in Galilee. And Philip Antipas had married a woman who was the daughter of a king in another part of the Middle East. So this is sort of a marriage of convenience in a way. Philip Antipas went to visit his half-brother Philip, or Herod Philip, in Rome. And when he was there, he fell in love with Herodias, Herod Philip's wife. And it ended up that Herod Philip divorced his wife, or vice versa, and also Herod Antipas divorced his wife, and he married Herodias, the previous wife of Herod Philip, his half-brother. Now, John the Baptist was alive in those days, and he was a man who was well respected, even though he was very strange. He didn't really fit into any kind of society, but he was well respected for his faith, for his integrity, for what he preached. And he had no problem talking to Herod and saying, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. This is not right." So then the story goes on. Herodias held it against him and wanted to kill him. So because of what John the Baptist had said regarding her marriage to Herod Antipas, she wanted John the Baptist killed. She wanted to kill him, but she could not. And Herod feared John. He actually had somewhat of a holy fear towards John, because John was a righteous man. John was a just and holy man, and as a result of that, he had some respect for him, even though there was this antagonism between them. He had some respect for him and did not want him killed. He did put him in prison. They did not want to kill him. And it says here, knowing that he was a just and holy man, and he protected him, and when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. So Herod listened to John. He actually, it said, called John out of prison to come and talk to him in the palace, and privately. So John heard him. Herod heard him. He listened to him. He sort of understood where he came from. He figured that John was a just and holy person, and Herod did not want to put him to death because he actually enjoyed listening to what he said. So then the opportune time came when Herod on his birthday gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. Now, birthdays in those days were not really recognized very much by the Jewish people, but in the pagan world and in the Gentile world and in the areas of Herod, in the realms of Herod, this is a big event. This was a big event primarily for men only, and it would go on for some time, and there would be all sorts of food and drink and partying and entertainment. This was a very somewhat crude event. So he gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. And when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him, the king said to the girl. Now Herodias had this daughter apparently by Herod Philip. She was now a teenager, a young woman, and she came in and did some kind of apparently lewd, very sexual, very entertaining dance to the men in this party, most of whom apparently by then were more than a little drunk. So Salome, which her name was, Herodias' daughter, came in and danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him. And the king said to the girl, "Ask me whatever you want and I will give it to you." He also swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you up to half my kingdom." In his stupor state, Herod Antipas made this pledge to this girl. She apparently aroused him to the point that he felt he could offer her anything, not maybe realizing at the time that he was in the company of all these other officials, and that a vow made in those days was one that you had to maintain, had to keep in order to maintain any kind of face or any kind of truth or respect. So he said, I will give you up to half my kingdom, anything you ask. Now, this girl, named Salome, apparently went right back to her mother and asked her mother, who was Herodias, what shall I ask for? And Herodias took this to be the opportunity that she really was looking for. She said immediately, don't wait, with haste, go right now. I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter. I want you to give me once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And apparently the king had sobered up a little bit by this time, but he was exceedingly sorry because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him. He did not want to refuse her. He was in a bind. He had made this oath, he had made this promise, and in those days, making an oath and a promise was a sacrosanct thing. And he did not want to go back on his word, even though he did not want to do it at the time. He did not want to refuse her. So immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded his head to be brought, and he went out and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. The disciples, his disciples, heard, and they came and took away his corpse and laid it in a tomb. This is a well-known story where Salome danced before King Herod, and King Herod had John the Baptist beheaded at her request. Why is this story put in this part of the Bible? There's no mention of Christ here. There's no mention of anything to do with the Lord. And it comes just after Jesus had been refused, had not been recognized by his own people, and he was not able to do anything because of their unbelief. And just after he sent out his disciples 2 by 2 into various areas and told them if they were rejected to just shake the dust of the area off their shoes and go on to someone else. And now we have this story of King Herod and Herodias and Salome. Well, there's a few things in here that I think are worth mentioning. First of all, it shows that if you, like John the Baptist, or like his disciples, or like any of who do work for the Lord, it's not an easy work. And it carries danger with it. It can be fraught with danger, it can be fraught with difficulties. And this is put here to emphasize the fact that John the Baptist was a man of God. He was a man who promoted God, who was just and holy, and yet he still suffered and was persecuted and was killed because of what he said, because he told the truth. Telling the truth today can be dangerous. And as time goes on, we can even see that it's becoming more and more dangerous all the time. The second thing is it shows us that we should not haphazardly make oaths or make decisions or do things on the spur of the moment without thinking really fully through what you're doing. The king was in an apparent inebriated state, in a vulnerable state, when he made this oath to this girl because he had been aroused by her dancing, enthralled by her presence. He had been overcome with her being. And therefore he made this promise in front of everybody and discharged this vow. And it shows how foolish, what one can get, the problems one can get into by making vows unnecessarily, by making promises or by making decisions without thinking through the ultimate result of what you're doing. Herod did not want to do what he had vowed to do, but he felt obligated to do it because of his position. So John the Baptist was beheaded because Herod Antipas made a very rash, unthinking decision and vow, and had to carry it through. So making a vow or making a decision or making a choice to do something without thinking through all the future consequences, can be disastrous. And this is also somewhat of a symbol as to what would be happening with Christ. Because Christ was an innocent person who was pure and holy, yet he too was sacrificed for what he said and what he was thought to have done. The rulers of the day killed Jesus just the same as they did kill John the Baptist. John the Baptist was beheaded, Jesus was crucified. Jesus' followers laid him in a tomb just as John the Baptist's followers took his body and laid it in a tomb as well. This is in some sense a forerunner of what would happen to Christ later on. But the whole story of this is that people who get involved in immoral situations, who get involved in situations and plans which are not correct and not pure, can often get themselves into further trouble by making pledges and making vows when they're not fully aware of what they're doing. And as a result, innocent people often get hurt. They get hurt back at the time of Mark. They get hurt back in the time of Herod Antipas. And they get hurt today because of what? The actions they take without thinking of where they're going or what is going to happen as a result of their actions. People also get hurt because they make decisions and do things without really thinking through fully the ramifications of what they're getting themselves into. So this is the story of Herod Antipas, of John the Baptist, and how the latter was executed under the guise and under the whim of a woman, Herodias, and her daughter Salome, who danced for Herod Antipas and seduced him into making a rash decision. This is really part of the whole purpose of how people who follow Christ and who follow the teachings of Christ can sometimes be persecuted, even though they're innocent of any real wrongdoing themselves. The wrongdoers are the ones who do the persecuting. So this is the end of this story, and we'll get into the next part, the next part of chapter 6 next week. We get into feeding the 5,000. So thanks again for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye for now.